Hello and welcome to Raingardens 101. My name is Nick Voss, Education and Outreach Coordinator at the Vadnais Lake Area Water Management Organization, VLAMO for short. And this is recorded live as a webinar, and we will keep this recording for future cost share program participants as a reference and a guide for building a rain garden. So what will we cover? We're going to go through the purpose and benefit of rain gardens, design, is it a good fit for your yard? Things to think about as you design and fit it into your yard routine. Building, go over the details. It's okay to go big or small. Maintenance, thinking about maintenance on the front end. And then we have our cost share program, the different levels of the program and levels of technical, financial assistance, and other resources. So with that, we are a small watershed in the Northeast Metro. It's a beautiful place. We have some great lakes. We have lots of wetlands, and we also have some dark secrets under our streets and in our channels and drainage ways, sediment and stormwater runoff being the most prominent pollutant to our surface waters. And that starts at storm drain level. It starts at the lawn. It starts on the paved surfaces such as parking lots and driveways, roads. And there's this direct connection causes some issues to our lakes and water. And I will definitely not bore you with graphs, but we have lots of graphs. We have data going back over 10 years on lake health. This graph shows phosphorus, which is a key nutrient in algae production. So the clean lakes are down there at low phosphorus levels. It's a good balance of nutrient levels, so it means cleaner water. The lakes above that dotted line are actually in a murky, turbid water state. It's really hard to tip that back into a clean water state. Pre-settlement native plant communities once looked something like this, and there's not many native plant communities left. And the key to this is thinking about the native plant communities as a function, the root systems and the soil health being a tool for the movement of water through land into groundwater and the basins of wetlands, lakes, and so on. So it changes the function of the watershed. The water cycle has changed and it's moving differently. And when it moves differently, different materials go along with that. Sediment, nutrients, anything that's on the pavement. So this is a common site, and we can ask, oh, where is water going? It all ends up in something like this. If you see a wetland that's a sea of cattails, it's probably clogged, and all of that sediment is more than what it would get. It's sped up the process of erosion and sedimentation, and it's sped up the process of shifting nutrients from the land to the water. So they end up looking something like this. And then we have, how does a rain garden improve that end destination? Well, we're catching it on the front end, and we're stopping water where it falls so that it moves less distance, picks up less material as it moves across the surface. So back to our watershed here in the Northeast Metro, we have 4 control structures that are these valuable spaces to let water ebb and flow in context of all the development that surrounds it. Because we've changed the water cycle and because the hydrology has changed, water does need a place to go. If we're ushering it away, it does cause problems downstream. So these control structures also called weirs, are places where we're replicating historic storage in these wetland complexes. So we have Whitaker Pond, Rice Lake, Grass Lake, and Lambert Lake Pond. And that's in order from north to south on Lambert Creek. The other areas of the watershed work as channels, going from Amelia all the way through to East Badness Lake. Then we have the connection from the Mississippi River because of the St. Paul Regional Water Services. I'm going to try a little trick here. We have St. Paul Regional Water Services drawing water from the Mississippi, comes from Fridley, and that comes into Charlie Lake. So these lakes are connected to drinking water system. Very cool. So that's a little bit about the watershed, the big picture of storage and slowing water down. We have our control structures, but we are in need of a better balance. We're in need of more storage upland so that the emergent and transition zones don't get hammered with sediment, nutrients, and all the other debris that comes with stormwater. So the balanced watershed includes water storage and velocity reduction upstream, downstream, in between. A lot of times we treat the landscape as if this transition zone shouldn't exist. It's either upland, usable area, or the emergent, okay, that gets to be a lake, that gets to be the wetland off limits area. The transition zone historically has been treated as if it's upland. So it's better to have something useful, better to build on or farm on, and so on. So the consequence is that there's more stress on the emergent zone, the actual water, standing water areas, and then the consequence, of course, is paying for it. The dredging and the maintenance on the tail end is what we have to do to just keep things functioning in a way that doesn't cause further problems to communities. And part of how we can do that is build up the upland to improve our storage. So those little stars are examples of rain gardens. Okay, so we have a diagram of a watershed from the small streams working their way into the big streams. And like in the beginning with native plant communities, we are trying to establish more spaces with native plants because of their root structures. And they're great for habitat, they're great for surface cover, and these root structures are really a powerhouse for all of the microbes and bacteria that work the soil, that keep soil active, water and air keep moving through it, and all those passages, again, are a function for the water cycle. So that gets it going down to the ground. This nice image was submitted by a resident in our watershed. So it's very inspiring. I thought it was a really fun project and a fun picture that we get to show off. And put it in a familiar way, it's kind of like a dishwasher. The dishwasher lasts longer and it works better if you pre-rinse the dishes. We're trying to pre-rinse the lake on the front end. We can sort out all that sediment, we can sort out a bunch of debris and let water keep moving into the ground, and from the water table in the ground feeds our lakes in a cleaner, more stable way. So that's the goal there. And now for some of the nuts and bolts. We have lots of properties that are generating more stormwater than you probably think. For a typical quarter-acre residential property, these are just some estimates. If a house was about 1,500 square feet, 1-inch rain event, we're calculating 925 gallons of runoff. Driveway, similar, 617 in a 1-inch rain event. And Compacted lawn is sometimes called green concrete. From the construction process, uh, soil gets very compacted around our homes and buildings, so it will only soak in a portion of what the rain that falls on it. Most of the time, that's about a quarter inch. If it's a 1 inch rain event, it's variable. There's not a surefire way to tell without being on site and taking a look at it, but a lot of water can come right off of the lawn, especially if it's a fast rainfall and it's already a dry year where the ground is hard. So all that adds up to something like 5,400 or more gallons in a 1 inch rain event. It often slips by unnoticed, and poof, uh, we have thousands of gallons, hundreds of thousands of gallons a year being generated just from a quarter acre. So times that by thousands of properties, and suddenly um, creating rain gardens and just storing some 1 inch rain event water on site gets to be a big deal, especially if it becomes a norm and we get dozens to hundreds of these rain gardens. We're getting a lot of water stored. And this is a common site. We have the runoff coming from upstream that's designed to do this, usher it away. We have a building up here. We have this one. They're all contributing to the grading for this whole block, and it's targeting the storm drain. What we would like to see is little pockets. If they're not close to a basement, can they be a pause and a storage spot, even if it's small, and there's overflow that can keep the water moving when it does get full. And an obvious question, but you got to ask it, is this a rain garden? And no, this is a water feature. It's for aesthetic purposes. We don't want to confuse ponds and landscaping ponds for rain gardens. What we can do is design rain gardens for large, small, and take a look at what you need in your yard to find out whether it's a good fit. This is a small rain garden, and it's over 10 feet away from a basement. And this particular rain garden consolidates that runoff so that the rest of the yard gets to be preserved for playtime. It's drier, it's easier to maintain or run a mower on because it's not soggy wet. So this is a consolidation style. And in this case, it's a great fit for the yard. You also have to think of soil. Do you have clay soil? How much space do you have between, say, utility lines or driveways, right-of-ways? And how much time are you willing to put into the design? This is a hidden rain garden behind a fence. So it's next to a garage and it fits within the existing landscaping. If you want to go the simple style, you can do a very simple planting plan. And this rain garden features a berm. So it's already kind of on a downslope. Stormwater must have been coming and making the yard wet. So catching it here prevents that, infiltrates it, and leaves this space a little drier, easier to maintain. Okay. A couple other examples. There are big ones. You can combine that with rock features. The picture on the left is a school, and the picture on the right is a neat under drain that takes the downspout, connecting it underneath the parking lot and sidewalk that you see on the right, and it outlets right into the rain garden. So this actually has a great winter maintenance strategy. What used to flow out onto the parking lot as that melt and freeze cycle now is just bypassed. Doesn't need salt, doesn't need shoveling, scraping. I mean, it needs shoveling, of course, but the winter maintenance is greatly reduced with that strategy. So those are great to see. We're seeing a lot more of that for the practical benefit. This rain garden has 2 outlets from 2 downspouts on the house and a dry creek from the basement sump pump. So if you are in a low area that has a high water table, that can be really tricky. And there are places in our watershed that really have problems with their foundation. That said, it's still possible to divert water far enough away and not risk the water going back into the basement. In this case, it works out. Okay, there's other ideas within a big landscaping plan or next to water features. So that rain garden is within this retaining wall on the middle tier. Garages are great for rain gardens because there's often just a slab, no foundation, and can take a downspout quite easily. But there's also elongated rain gardens. Low spots, ditches, and swales can be great. So rain garden design, there's a lot of hardware you can choose from. The pop-up feature or this underground, what's also called a French drain. And notice that the pop-up and the outlet are surrounded by some rock to break the velocity. So that's really important. If you're doing something that's a little innovative, you're compressing, you're contracting the flow of water. That's going to speed up the velocity and move mulch or move soil and maybe even harm plants. So that's breaking the velocity, getting water to slow down. And you could be fancy about it, or you could be real simple. Paver edging or plain black edging, metal edging. That's personal preference and aesthetics. Or retaining walls. If you're working around a slope, these are all possible. They're quite an attraction. Could be the talk of the neighborhood, but not obligated to go that big. Think about your protective fencing. New plants will be munched on by bunnies and deer. So in that transition time when they're vulnerable, have some chicken wire or hardware cloth ready to surround your new plants. Okay, so drainage strategies. This is property from our cost share program, and they did some creative things and kind of blended infiltration into the yard in a sneaky way. Water from the downspout is actually coming under the turf and emptying out into here. This is a rain garden, even though it doesn't look like it. The bonus here is that this is a low-mow turf, and it's another smiley face from me, and there's a prairie planting in the back here. So this is a multi-strategy stormwater hotspot. Really fun to see, but sometimes it takes a while to build into this. And here's a smaller scale example. Again, stormwater from the rooftop downspouting under the sidewalk. And the pop-up device gently lets water soak into the rain garden, and there's an overflow feature here for the really big rain events. But pretty small, pretty effective, and again, great for winter maintenance, a lot less stress and time spent on clearing a sidewalk. Okay, again with downspout connections, this time this basin is going into a dry creek that goes into another basin that's just off the picture. So this homeowner started with one, a few years later, well, why not just create another one? So again, over here, and this other basin is a little bigger. Um, Notice they're working close to a basement here, so the outlet is a strategy so that water does keep on moving. They dug it so that the outlet is a little lower, and as you observe and build these projects, you can adjust your outlet based on like, what are you seeing? Is it draining fast enough? As you have standing water, you think there's too much water? Turn the dials so that you keep water moving, and that kind of thing. So this yard eventually was planted all around those basins, and now it's a lovely pollinator oasis. And that dry creek from the second basin is coming out to the turf. Then we have some things to consider when you're designing your planting plan. You could hire a contractor, and we work with lots of contractors who also are familiar with our cost share program. They might even fill out the application and kind of keep things moving so that they're kind of a one-stop shop. But you might be able to do it yourself as well. This is the pretty professional, really, really detailed planting plan. If you're not up for that, you can keep it simple, and a few basic measurements go a long way. What you really need to know is the plants that you're using and the recommended spacing for those plants. When you have that and match that with the square footage of the rain garden itself, notice that the dimensions here are drawn out really, really clearly. It doesn't really have to be exact, but you know that you've got, these dimensions, 18 by 24 feet. You know that, okay, if maybe you're in a corner or maybe it's an oval or an egg shape, you'll create some gentle curves, and you can divide this up with 5 to 8 species, maybe even 3 if you want. The temptation here is to have fun plant shopping. And once you're at a nursery, at a greenhouse, and you're seeing all the possibilities, it's so easy to get swept away, and soon you've got a whole bunch of plants and you're trying to cram them in, or they look so small and innocent, and you think they'll fit, so you put 10 in this little spot that's designated for a little Joe Pye weed, and then poof, 3 years later, they're chunky, they spread, and they're filling up the space. So this is an example for, if you're not trying to count it out and be specific, you can err on the small side. With this Rudbeckia plant in the front of this design, this is Black-Eyed Susan. If I were to be simple and start small, I wouldn't want to put 5 in there. Those are going to spread. Start with 3, maybe even 2, and just watch what happens. Similarly, you've got your border plants. They're going to spread and fill in that space, but you don't need to pack those tight. And then you just kind of think about how you want to maintain it and how much space you really want in between the plants for the tidy look or the dense look. Again, you do this before you go to the nursery and before you start thinking about your purchases. What kind of plants will live in this sun or shade condition? What kind of soil do you have? That's going to guide 80% of your decision making. And if you want it to be quick, you don't want it to be laborsome, then you're going to have to use that as your basis. There'll be maybe 2 or 3 that will be the obvious ones. If you have a certain sun, certain shade preferences, and and combined with your aesthetic preferences, maybe you want little Joe Pye weed versus a regular Joe Pye weed. That could be the difference between 3 feet high and 7 feet high, or sweet Joe Pye weed would be something that would get super high. So that kind of thing guides your decision making. It also lets you plan for your budget, and that's really important. If you have a grant that's going to be covering 75% up to, say, $750, which is our soil health grant, then you want to be able to reach the match for going over 750 just enough to be able to get the full grant. But then not go way over budget so that you've got extra plants, extra material. And the spectrum down here is this mulch to plant cover spectrum. This is for you to think about whether you're going to spend the money on thick mulch and applying that every few years to maintain 3 to 4 inches. That's what's going to resist weed cover. Or are you going to not invest much in mulch and try to plant densely, put more plants in to have plant cover be the weed resistant feature? When plants are growing together, they're taking up that space, they're shading the soil so that weeds won't be able to establish. They can still establish, and tree seedlings can be really aggressive, but overall, they will block out a lot of the weeds, and so will mulch. So this is something to think about on the front end. So the design, what are we trying to do as we think like like an engineer? We have our ponding depth. I forgot how long my animation was. So that darker soil area has been over excavated into a bowl-like shape and refilled with soil compost or sometimes sand mixture to get soil from the surface, or excuse me, get water from the surface into that root layer. And notice that the slopes are really gentle. We're trying to build something with plantable area from side to side. Sometimes it's easy to think, well, maybe you want to maximize your capacity to hold water. So then you could create a wall or like a tray of sorts. But that's gonna have a lot of problems with soil falling, mulch falling, and perpetually, having weeds grow, and it's just sad. We want these gentle slopes. This is an example if you have the inflow source from the surface, and say the downspout is the arrow. Your lowest spot is going to be this blue wet zone, and it gets a little higher and into the dry zone after that. And then you have the surface or the turf. If you're doing that pop-up strategy from previous slides, you would design it with this kind of bowl shape. The wet zone's right in the middle. Okay, the key to having driveway diversion is to have a really cool mullet, if you want to. But it's another strategy. You can do a cut into the driveway to take that runoff, direct it into a basin, Notice the rain garden is also outlined with a berm on this one. So overflow is targeted to one of the ends instead of just all out flowing into the street. I just couldn't resist it with the mullet photo. Or you could do a curb cut rain garden. These are kind of the gold star of small scale stormwater infrastructure. The curb cut takes water from the street, pre-filters it in this catch box, also called the sump, and water makes its way into the basin, spreads out. It's going to be a job to empty out that catch box, but then again, that's the benefit. That's the work of taking what's invisible, that dark secret that I mentioned at the beginning, and bringing it to light. We see the gunk and we see everything that's otherwise sneaking off into the wetland, or in this case, the wetland's right behind their home. So it's a job to clean that out, scrape it, and empty that into the trash. Sometimes once a month on the June and July seasons. And this kind of decision is for if you take joy in this. Obviously, you're taking joy in the native plants, pollinator habitat, converting turf into something that's not just lawnmower habitat, and taking joy in helping the downstream uh, water resource and the people that live downstream, really, because all that water that's being stored is reducing the stress on how much the wetland or the control structure, those weirs, are needing to hold. Okay, I think I revealed my bias. One more slide here shows it filling up, and after it's full, it bypasses. So, tons of fun. This is actually the higher levels of our landscape cost share program. So building this and applying for grant fundings with this amount of infiltration will have a higher payout. As a watershed, we prioritize these, again, because it's having much more of a direct impact to the downstream water bodies. That's benefiting properties downstream. Even if it seems small, it's important for us to get these built and on the landscape. Okay, some basics. We want it 3 to 9 inches. We want the surface to be dry in less than 48 hours. Mosquitoes will start germinating sometime shortly after that. So our drain time is going to have no standing water after 48 hours. You might need soil amendments. Depending on your size, you have to think about you're going with bags or a bulk order. If you go with a bulk order, ask some key questions about prevention of preventing the spread of jumping worms, and some free compost sites might have a lot of weeds in their soil. Makes a lot of work later on. So think about those things. Plants with deep roots, like the previous slides, our native plants are going to be just that. We have plants that are spaced in specific areas of the rain garden to grow well. So then it's time to assess your site. We have a lot of tools on the Vlamo website for measuring distance, lines, or shapes. We even made videos about this tool on the Vlamo YouTube channel, and I'll have a link at the end of the slideshow. So you're going to get your square footage of a rain garden. You're going to get a visual for where your downspouts, something like the slope and like where water's going. You can see this yard is kind of working diagonal this way to this way. And then you need to check your utilities. Give time for all the different utility service providers to respond to a request. That could take up to a week sometimes, and that'll tell you where you should put it in the first place. Okay, finding that GIS site, that's on the bottom of our homepage, and there's this icon, GIS site, that you will click on, pulls up our map. Okay. Think about the setback from the foundation. This is a rain garden that looks a little close to the house, but because the foundation is back over here, the basin actually is way over here. And this is all just connected to native planting. And it's graded in a way to bring water that way. Outflow onto the lawn, and then this street is kind of a ditch that funnels water down the road or down the side of the road. So think about the foundation. You want that 10-foot window for our safety. Okay. And then we have practical things. If you're really excited about building a rain garden in a time when you're not mowing for a few weeks, then you're not going to physically see where the lawnmower has to fit. Is it going to fit in a strip between the fence and the garden? All those things. How are you going to maintain around it? The border is really important, both for the aesthetics as well as the success of the plants in the rain garden itself. So, good things to think about. Easements. This is a homeowner that knew they were building in the right of way. So if the city does something, they have the ability to tear this up. But then they also made the choice to maintain this little strip by hand. So, you know, it looks nice. It's a way that you can reduce that mowing. They obviously wanted to push the rain garden back to the edge of the property instead of having it up here further. And they didn't mind maintaining this by hand. So that's the kind of decision you have to make. A lot of times that's the kind of thing that kind of is a hang up, but you just go with what feels good, what's motivating, what's exciting, what brings you out in the morning to go out in the yard and be excited to, you know, do your maintenance. That's really best case scenario. Selection on where to put it. Try to move this in case you can see that. Okay. Stormwater from the roof down this way, or stormwater from the garage down the driveway. So choose one, maybe both. This would be a great spot for a rain garden, or that would be a great spot. But your use of the yard matters too. You know, do you want to have this kind of open space for kids to play on, or are you just gonna have the playtime be the backyard? That's the kind of question. You want to dig a hole, find out what soils you have. Are there different layers of soil? You see the compacted layer on the right, and then this one is the deeper layer where soil gets darker and richer. A lot of times that's just fill that's brought in after a construction. And sometimes that gets very compacted. Worst case scenario, you'd be breaking a shovel like that, and that can be kind of a a painful experience. But for interpreting your soil, we want to have about 6 inches for that silty, loamy soil. Sand, you're going to have up to 9 inches depth. Clay is down to 3 inches depth, and you are going to even want to add sand and soil and loosen things up at the bottom. This is the area where if you're really clayey after the soil test and early infiltration test, it might not be a good fit to go all in for a rain garden. You might want to do a native planting that has a gentle grading to kind of take in some water, but just to slow it down instead of capture it and infiltrate it. Or you just want to be aware that you're going to have not much infiltration, and you'll have to create the outlet in a way that lets water get out easily. So determining the depth is a 24-hour process. First, you dig the hole about a foot by a foot, about a shovel length, the spade shovel deep and the spade shovel wide at the head of the shovel. The amount, the inches that the water level drops times the hours equals the rain garden depth. So in a 24-hour period, you have 0.25 that gets you 6 inches deep. Before you do this test, you fill it with water completely and let it drain all the way down. It's that second one that is determining your infiltration test. Okay, we have our depth. Now, how big of a rain garden should we build to capture a 1-inch storm? Most rain gardens are targeting a 1-inch storm. Again, the most important thing to capture is early on in the rain event. And you could go bigger if you want to, but then you're starting to get into your budget. Are you really an enthusiast? Do you want to try to capture as much as you can if you have the space and you're not working around utilities? Maybe that might work, but start here and then see if you can go bigger after that. Because the bigger it is, the more mulch and the more soil you're going to have to be purchasing. So here's a calculation of square footage. Again, these are found on that GIS site from the earlier slide. You find your aerial, use the measuring tools, and certain spots on your house, you kind of figure out what drains to what side, and then you add it up. So we have square footage from the roof, and then we have the calculation. Drainage area, square feet, divided by rain garden depth. So say we have that 6 inches depth. Oh, clay soil. We're not going to have 6 inches. We have 3 inches. That adds up to 660 square feet. 220 square foot rain garden is what you get. And, depending on what you're collecting, you might not need to go any bigger. Are you getting water from a neighbor's property and, trying to get a little extra storage, or is it just from your downspout and it's built to that that square footage from the get-go? Okay, marking out the area. Do this first and get your big picture with your maintenance in mind. How are you going to walk around it? How's the mower going to go around it? What kind of feature is going to complement your space? You don't want really sharp corners. You want it to be easy on the eyes. This can be a really fun process. I actually recommend taking a rope. Just a long rope of paracord is super cheap, and 50 feet, 100 feet of paracord lets you visualize your border, move it around easily, experiment, think about, extra planting areas or extra boulders you want and that kind of thing. So you could keep the paracord down. Some folks will paint the border, some will put flags there. You just need to see it for when it comes time to kick up the sod. Before you kick up the sod, calculate the mulch and soil that you'll need. There are lots of mulch soil calculators on the internet. I just pull up one of the top ones that comes up on a Google search and enter your square footage and the depth of mulch you're after. It's got to be at least 3 inches to be effective at preventing weeds from germinating, and that also holds moisture in the soil, helps the plants get established. Oh, and that reduces the need to constantly be watering. You don't want it to be as finicky as starting new turf grass, which is probably the worst kind of watering multiple times a day chore. You can tell I have a chip on my shoulder about turf grass maintenance, but find out the amount of soil and find out your mulch ahead of time. So now you're able to call around, investigate the prices. Are you going to get a delivery and pay for delivery services, or are you just going to get bags, which are more expensive, but you'll be able to do it on your own time if you got the transport space. Then you get to removing sod. So theoretically, all of that legwork is going to make this easier for more legwork, pun intended. Sod kickers can be manual or a gas powered. If you're doing a really big project, you might want to go gas powered. And most of the time, though, I think the sod kickers are doable for small to medium rain gardens. You want to get a sprinkler and wet that down before trying to dig it all up. Then you've got your loosening. This is a tiller doing it in a, the power efficient way. You could do this with a shovel, it'll take longer, but they're getting down there to half a foot to a foot down to really loosen that up before you add your soil amendment. Loosening the compacted zone, include compost. And then you get into your compost amendment. So this is the rain garden from that earlier slide. And you can kind of see how the slopes and the different tiers are working. Eventually you will want to grade this out so that it's nice and smooth. This was fresh after it was dumped in, so it looks like a hump, but you wouldn't want to plant in that. Okay. Then we have our outlet strategies. These are all examples from our watershed with, say, a single concrete structure or a dry creek with river rock. So once that rain garden was complete for the basin, compost amendment soil was added throughout this one to create the native planting. Again, it's graded in a way to usher water into the basin. And then we have the planting time. Like I said at the beginning, you really got to know whether you're going to be a plant enthusiast and you want the scruffy, dense look or the neat and tidy look. So this was laid out this way. A few more plants were added because this is a dense planting, forewarning, because here's how it looks. Myself, I'm kind of a plant enthusiast and I get excited about this because when you get to know the plants, you recognize that all of these are supposed to be here. There's really no undesired vegetation here. Um, but if that's not your thing, that's okay too. Um, no pressure, and there's definitely some wiggle room for how it looks. We showed this earlier. And then we have our maintenance. This was a rain garden that was neglected for a couple years, and poof, goldenrod took over. Goldenrod's a native plant, but it can be very aggressive. And we wanted to return this rain garden to a balance. We had high school students come over, and we tackled that in just a couple hours with the team effort. So that really scruffy look came back to that bottom right picture, and eventually got tidied up. So that's the journey you've got to think about. Are you going to do a seasonal maintenance, little bits per once a month, every other month, so that it avoids a big backup of maintenance where you get this inundation? Or are you going to intentionally leave it and apply thick mulch and give it the best chances so that it can survive, do well, get really established for months on end? Once the rain gardens mature, you'll be able to go a few months without touching it if you don't mind a few weeds. Plants are mature, mulch is thick, you've done your early season work to tackle weeds that are starting. That middle to late season won't be as much work if you've done that on the front end. Or maybe it's not a good fit if you don't want to be maintaining plants, observing, keeping track of what plant is what, and does this belong there? And if it's not fun, you're not going to do it. And when that's neglected, it only gets to be like that uh, food in the back of the fridge, where it only gets worse and gets scarier to approach it. So we have resources like this on our website, maintenance schedule. Um, Here's some tips on your target times. You've got the Labor Day, Independence Day, Memorial Day weekends. Those are key times to do your brush ups according to when weeds are germinating, different times of the year. And like we've alluded to, we have our different plants that go at different parts of the rain garden. So we got our average dry conditions. Generally, these are the low growing plants in the front, or in the back. You can see, there's higher things that can be a nice backdrop. So think about that in your decision making. Nice low borders so that you get tiered levels of flowers and plants. Things that grow in that moderate average to moist soil. As just some examples. And your moist soil conditions located at the bottom of the basin. If it's a dry period, plan to be watering them yourself to help them succeed, especially in the establishment phase. Right now it's 2022. We've had a couple really dry summers and we're still in a drought. So some of the plants that have been intended to be at the bottom of a basin might not have gotten what they needed naturally. So something to think about. You got all these layers, all these nuances. Okay, so other resources. We have our wet soil specialist guide. That is a great way to plan for rain gardens, as well as just soggy areas, places next to a wetland, low spots. Doesn't need to be a full-on rain garden to try to get this dense vegetation that can handle wet areas. If it's a struggle to mow, and it's soppy and it's frustrating, there is another way. So, we try to put some ideas out there. And then we have our practical plantings. We have ground covers for wet, medium, or dry soils. So those are on our website as well. Grant programs, landscape level 1, soil health, or for big projects, landscape level 2, but those are reserved for really the public-facing public properties, parks, and things like that. Then we have our do-it-yourself resources. Everything I've talked about and more is in our lovely rain garden book. This is the standard, at least in the Midwest. I think it's spread even further than that, just because it's a handy guide. It's really solid. It tells you everything you need to know, and we've got that available. We also have weed guides. In long-term perspective, you're going to want to invest some time and energy to knowing what is a weed, and does it have a pretty flower and it's a weed, or is it something you want in the rain garden? Those are the kind of things that turn not being sure into just a snappy decision of like, oh, that's a weed, I'm going to pull that instantly, poof, moving on. That's the kind of thing that really helps a rain garden thrive. So we want these resources handy, and we want that information to be readily available. So pick one of these up, and we're also available for questions for folks who are involved in our cost share program. To do this learning, it's a big shift if you're coming from conventional mowing, but we want it to be rewarding, and we want it to be a learning process. More resources such as your rain garden math, digging a hole, and soil depth tests, deer resistant plants, a bunch of other things are on our website at this link. So get familiar with that so that, before you're doing your construction or need to do maintenance, you know where to go, and you've got familiarity with for what's there. And it goes a long way. Other ways to be involved outside of rain gardens. There's a great need for adopting a storm drain, and this is a great way for kids, families to get a little feel for a public service close to home, out of volunteer time, with as much or little time you want to put into it. Cleaning out that storm drain also helps fill the gaps between when a street sweeper goes by. So if it rains and the sweeper hasn't gone by yet, you're able to catch that. Or if the street sweeper has already gone by, it might not come by again. And fall and spring are really those target times for Adopt a Drain. So that's exciting. And do connect with us. We have events, news, resources, fun stuff. We do all sorts of projects around the watershed, and we're excited when folks are interested and following along. And contact us for questions. Again, I'm Education Outreach Coordinator. Lauren San Pedro is the Cost Share Program Coordinator. So if you're seeking to apply to get funding to help pay for a project like this, you're going to reach out to Lauren, and we can get started with an on-site visit, or other questions, things like that. Thank you for attending. Thanks for spending time to get the basics, to brainstorm with us, and we hope it's been helpful. We're excited to see what happens, what comes of it. Take these tools and resources, make them your own, and have fun with it. So with that, we'll stop our recording and talk to you later. Have a good night.